Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time to get started here. This webinar is about IMP. I have the intention to keeping this to about 45 minutes to an hour. We'll see how long it takes. And also, as most webinars, I have a small presentation, but I am going to try and do as much as possible with the actual application. So we'll see how that goes and where we end up in terms of timing, but that is the goal. Okay, so this is about IMP, and this is a small agenda of what we are going to be talking about. This will not tell you very much, but the intention is that you listen to what I'm saying, of course. And rest assured that there is some reason to this madness, and you'll find out all about that. So let's get started. A little introduction, a few slides anyway that I wanted to do before we dive into using the actual product. And the first slide perhaps is what is IMP. I've covered this a couple of times before, but I think it's important to go over this again, also because my own understanding of products sometimes changes over time, and you learn what is more important to customers while dealing with implementations. So what is IMP? It's an automated layout planning software. And remark that I don't say imposition software. I don't say imposition software because it does more than imposition. It creates very efficient layout plans on the one hand, both for single products and for ganged products, so products imposed together on a sheet, and it also does the actual imposition. And what I'll show in the product itself is that it has some very nice ways in which that can be implemented in a larger company where you have planners and you have people in prepress doing imposition. What kind of jobs? Well, the easy answer would have been everything, but I've specified it a little bit here. Bound jobs, rectangular, unbound jobs, and die-cut based jobs. So well, the three big categories of jobs, if you want, that you can encounter, and IMP handles all of them without too much separation between them. You'll see that as well in this session. And so we're talking about a manual imposition tool. Well, yes, but we're also talking about much more than that. There is the ability to use CSV and XML to create products. There is the ability to use hot folders with IMP. There is the ability to drive IMP completely from XML. And we'll go in much more detail on all of those steps. We'll start with the walking bit, and that is then, of course, the manual bit, but we'll cover the CSV and XML example. We'll cover IMP flow and looking at hot folders and XML-driven workflows. So we'll go over all of that. Now, why is IMP special? There are a few other products on the market that do similar things. Well, it's special because of a number of features that set it apart. There really isn't much separation of jobs, if you want to put it that way. So you can do things like taking bound and unbound jobs and gang them together. The same with those die-cut jobs as well. The bound and unbound example is one that I will be showing in the demo later on, because it is something that comes back quite often in actual projects. It can also do very advanced layout calculation. And yes, I have already said that, but if you start looking at IMP and the calculations it does, and the built-in logic and intelligence that you have in there, that's a very important feature. It does creation of imposed job and cutting information from the same application. So from IMP, when you have calculated a plan and a layout, you can generate an imposed PDF, imposed JDF, you can generate cutting information, you can generate HPGL cutting information if that's what you need. So all of these different things that you need in the rest of the workflow can be generated straight from this one application. It also does imposition on large sheets, and we've seen that sometimes makes a difference in projects. If you're dealing with large format, for example, and the sheet sizes that you want to gang jobs on are big, then IMP can typically handle those up to a really big size. There is a job database. I already talked about the planning aspects and the prepress side of things, generating the imposition. Well, the job database allows you to interact between those two parts of a company. You can check into the database, and then later on you can check out a job or a plan from the database, add the PDF file, and do the actual, generate the actual imposed PDF, for example. And it does completely hands-off ganging of jobs. Imposition as well, of course, but the question we most frequently get is, can I integrate this with an MIS system or an ordering system or some web-based portal and do the ganging completely automatically in the backend? And the answer is obviously yes, and I'll be showing some of that as well. Okay, so I haven't said much about die-cut jobs or label or packaging, and that there's a reason for that. The reason is not that IMP does not support that. The reason is that there is actually an additional webinar on March 9th, so 2 weeks from now, to learn about that aspect of the product, because there are some, there's quite a lot of special functionality on that side of the world, and I wanted to keep this webinar relatively short. So subscribe on our website for that additional webinar in 2 weeks, and you can learn everything about packaging and label and so on. So basically jobs that are based on die-cut information. Okay, so that's being said, that's the introduction, and I think we can start by looking at IMP a little bit. So what does IMP do from a manual point of view? Well, it allows creation of products and components, of course, and then it will automatically, or in this case manually, create a plan. So it will calculate all of the different options that you have with the equipment that you have, and then it will calculate a plan of that. And what I need to do now is go to IMP, and I can do so by launching the manual application. That's what we are going to start with. And before I do anything else, I want to very quickly bring up the configuration database again. And the configuration database is where you define all of the different equipment that you have and where you define all of the materials that you use at a certain point. So for the equipment, it's quite easy. I can define offset presses, I have web-fed presses, I have the same on the digital side. So all of these things can be defined. And for each of the devices that I have in my configuration in IMP, I have an overview of basic parameters, such as I'm just taking out one example, the minimum sheet size and the maximum sheet size, the sheet thickness that this device can handle. You also have costing parameters in there. I can set up different margins that this device requires. I can define a number of additional non-printing strips. I have a whole list of parameters that I can enter. And some of these differ quite a bit between the different types of devices. If I go to costing here, for example, and I would compare that to costing on the digital side, you'll see that there is click cost calculation on the digital side, which of course there isn't on the sheet-fed press, the offset sheet-fed press side. So depending on the device and the type of device, you set up all of the parameters in IMP that IMP should take into account while it does its calculations. And it's very important that you do this well, that you spend some time on making sure that the values in here are realistic for the costing aspects and correct for the technical aspects, because all of these parameters will actually be taken into account once IMP starts planning. And the second aspect when it starts planning, of course, is that you can also define all of the different materials, stocks that you have in-house. And there too, it is very important to make sure that all of that is correct. And on this side, on the material side, there is actually a way to automatically define those by simply importing them from a CSV file. Why not the same thing for devices? Well, I'm assuming that you won't have new devices every week or 2 weeks. So keeping that list of devices updated is relatively easy, and is also a relatively static list. My collection of devices is quite big here because I have a demo set up, of course, but in most cases that will be a limited list of information that you have to maintain. On the materials side, things typically change quicker, and in that case, you simply have to export that information from, for example, an MIS system or an ERP system where you already have that information. If you export it as a correct CSV file, then you can simply load that CSV into IMP, and all of those definitions will be done automatically. Now, the technical parameters in here are also very important, not just the sizes, of course, but also, for example, folding depth. If you start looking at bound product, is something that quite heavily is relied upon by the automatic algorithm to determine what signatures are going to be created and so on. So make sure that all of that information in the configuration dialog is accurate before you start working. And then when I've done that, I can actually, in a very, very manual way, really basic way, I can define a product, a new empty product. I can give that product an ID, some notes, a due date. I can set the number of copies that I want, some additional metadata for that. And when I create that, IMP basically creates an empty product. And in that empty product, I have 3 areas of importance now. And those are the bound, unbound components, and then the plans I will create from both of those. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time in this manual section, and you'll see later why, because it's much easier and quicker to do things in a different way. But I can actually manually define bound components. I can manually define unbound components, and I can edit all of the different properties of those components. For example, I have the component properties here. That's that little button I clicked at the top there that allows me to give the component a name. I can change the number of copies if I want that, but I have a whole bunch of job properties that I can now set, choose the actual material that I want to print this on, and I have additional bleed, offcut, and other properties. So all of that can be automatically created if that is what you want. And in some cases, it is easier to start from an existing file. If I have a label that is a PDF file, I can simply take the label, and much of the information will be derived from that. I can set this up on the in the unbound components and in the bound components, and then I could create a plan and start planning that all out. So that's a very manual way of dealing with things, and because it would require entering quite a bit of information, I'm not going to go any further into this in this webinar. Instead, we're going to stop walking, and I'm going to go to the next stage and show you some faster ways to create products. And I'm going to start off, I think, with a CSV file and see what we can do with that for some unbound components. And then we're going to use an XML file that will create both bound and unbound components together, and we'll see what we can get done in terms of planning for that. Now, CSV file first, and I want to show you what that is going to look like. It's not the, so we're going to go to a rectangular component. It's actually an unbound component. The folder name in here is incorrect, I've noticed. And if I show you the CSV file that I have, you'll see that in that CSV, I have information about the different jobs. The jobs themselves in this demo setup live inside this rectangular PDFs folder. The CSV file contains the name of the job, contains the dimensions of the job, finishing that is going to be used, the color set that is going to be used. So you see some with CMYK, you see some that have other colors in there. It is going to contain the actual quantity that I want. It's going to contain the paper that I want to print this on, paper weight, and so on. So there are, in this CSV format, there are quite a few different pieces of information that I can enter in there, and that IMP will automatically take into account. If you come back in 2 weeks for the packaging webinar, you'll see another CSV format and a way where much more of the information can actually be corrected or collected from the PDF files themselves. But in this one, I'm using the CSV format 2, and in IMP, I can say product from CSV format 2, and then I'm going to specify that CSV file that I just showed you and open that. And the process is very, very similar to what I started out with doing manually. I still have a product that is created. I have the ability to add bound and unbound components in there. There are no plans yet. We haven't gotten to that stage yet. But all of those unbound components were gotten from that CSV file automatically. So everything that IMP does now from that CSV file are things that I could also have done in a manual fashion. It's just a lot faster to do it this way. And you can see in those jobs that I have a list of the materials that they are going to use, that same color information, the coatings that are in there, the sizes, and so on. So all of that is in there. I can go look at a definition of one of those jobs. Now, I don't have any information about PDF files in there at the moment, so I have a placeholder here, but I could still go in and change the individual characteristics of any of the jobs. From that CSV file, IMP simply created individual components. If I now want to change the properties for one of those components, then I can simply go in and do that. But let's go back to this overview page of the product, and let's add a plan, because that's what we are here for. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some of these components to the plan that I want to create. And in this case, and that's actually very logical, I'm going to add them by material. So let me take all of the products that have to be imposed on coated paper to 20 grams. I simply add those. I have no previews yet, again, because we haven't added any PDF files to here. And now I can create a plan, and you can see different options in there. One would be plan one layout at a time, which would show me one particular sheet and the layout on that sheet, so that I can make a choice, and then it will show me the next one and the next one until all the products are planned. In this case, what I'm going to do is say plan non-stop. There are quite a few products, and I'm interested in the final result in this particular case. This is the list of all of the devices that I have in that configuration dialog that you still remember from the beginning. And now I could select a couple of these devices. Doesn't matter how many, doesn't matter which ones. The ones that I want to use for these particular jobs. I can make some additional choices about algorithm. What I want to do here is rectangular nesting. This is a rectangular product, so that's fine. You can already see that there is also irregular nesting, and that's something for the next webinar. And then some additional options, things such as grain direction and so on. So all of those can be set up. They can be made to default as well if you always have the same options. And then I can say plan, and this will take a few seconds because Imp is now going to make sure that all of these components are planned in. On the left-hand side, you can already see where those components are planned. You see these gray numbers that appeared everywhere, and that's the number of the sheet that those components or the layout that those components were planned on. And this is the complete plan. You can see that it actually found a solution with multiple devices, multiple sheet sizes, and so on. If I want to, I could create a report from that, a PDF report that would tell me exactly what all of the different parameters are for each of those plans, where the jobs are on each layout, but also things like total costs and wastage and so on. And you actually already see that information at the bottom of the screen as well. So I talked about this job database. Well, imagine that I'm in a company where I have planning and imposition phases in a workflow. What I could do at that point is, now that I've created this plan, I could check that into the job database. This is called gang CSV2, but let's make the product ID webinar Imp. The due date in here, I can set an explicit job ID in here. I could give the job another name as well. And then I can check that into the database. The database is a separate component that can run on the same machine, just as what happens here, because I have a demo set up, but it can also run on any other machine in the network, so that different Imp installations refer to the same database setup, of course. And once I've checked that into the database, I can close the job, and later on someone can say check out, search in the database for the jobs that satisfy a particular criterion, and then I can check that out of the database. And what you can see is that I get the exact same component information, I get the exact same plan as the one we were working with before. You can check this into the database, and later on I can retrieve the same information from the database, and you will have the same information as you were working for before. And so what I've done is I've checked that into the database, close the job, and someone else can go into the database and then check it out again. And what you're seeing on screen right now is the same information as what I left off with in the beginning. So if I have someone in prepress who has to pick up from someone in planning, then this can be done by using that job database. Now, we're still looking at placeholders, and that's of course not the intention. What I can do is I can say auto assign content. In red, you can see a list of the jobs that were missing PDF files for, and I can now go into browse, find that job information, rectangular PDFs, and then all of the files turn to green, meaning that Imp found all of the different PDF files that were referenced in that CSV file. And I say assign, and then all of that PDF information is added into the plans that were created. And now I could go into layout and finish this up for impositioning, perhaps by placing a number of manual marks in here, but I also have mark templates I can create, and those mark templates would allow me to place information on the sheet in an automatic fashion. If you at that point still want to add something, I'll give you just one little look at that template. And with the variables that you have in the templates, you would be able to get variable information from the job into this layout that I'm creating right now. So this could be ready to go to imposition. However, I have still, even though Imp created this layout automatically, I can still go in and change things manually if I want to. For example, I could go in and rotate jobs myself or reposition them myself. What would happen in many more cases is that you might still want to switch a number of jobs that have the same size, simply because from a color perspective, for example, it's better to have them switched. And I can do that by using a special swap jobs tool, and that would allow me to very quickly change the position of some of these jobs in the layout that I have. From there, I can export a PDF file, an imposed PDF file, and I can export JDF, which can either be imposition JDF or cutting JDF, or I can export an explicit die line, either in DXF format, for example, or for some devices, such as some of the laser cutting devices, HPGL cutting information. Okay, so that is a plan that was created from an initial CSV file, where the work has been done automatically by Imp, but where I can still, at the last minute, intervene before I create the actual imposed information. We also looked at using the job database to communicate between different people working on this, or someone planning and someone in impositioning, working on these projects at different times. So let me close that and go back to my examples. If I go to bound and unbound, what I want to do here is show you a different way of creating a product. And that different way is using an XML file. And in that XML, if I open it up, you can see what is inside of there. What I have in that XML is a list of all of the components that I want to work with, the properties for each of those components. So that, again, is very similar to the information that I had in the CSV file, simply a different way of providing the information. And what I also have in here is the full path to the file that I want to use for each of those components. And that, of course, is important when you start thinking about integration and start thinking about, for example, an MIS system that would automatically create an XML file and then use Imp to do the planning and imposition. We're not going there yet, but I am going to use that information in the XML file to automatically create the job for me again. And I can do that by going into import and then say product from XML file, and then point to that XML file that I have here, and that will populate this new product that it created with a number of bound components in this case. So this is an example of one of the bound components, and then I have, again, an unbound component, a little leaflet in this particular case with a front and a back. So two types of components together, no plans yet. Again, we've only done job definition in this particular example, so no planning has been done yet. But I can go into plan, add, and then I could say, well, I only want the unbound components together or the bound components together, but let's not restrict ourselves. And let's simply add everything together. And just to show you, I still have the different components on there in that list. And I can plan that out. We'll do this on offset presses for this particular example. And again, Imp is going to come up with a number of examples for me. Now, what I selected this time was not the fully automatic gang all of the products or all of the components for me. I selected to create one layout at a time now. So Imp is showing me the first layout based on its calculations. I can select something else if I want, and the preview is actually updated every time I select a different layout in here. And once I do next, then the second layout will be created with the components that remain. As you can see on the left-hand side, 3 of the components are planned, or 2 of the components here are planned already. The 2 others still need to be done if I select this particular layout. And I could, in here, and let me just show that to you, I could also say, instead of the default choice that IMP suggests, take a different press, and in that case, the solution would be a little bit more expensive. It would cost me an additional $80 to get that output. So I select that, I say next, then the second layout is created automatically, and there again I can select different possibilities, and when I'm happy with one of those I say done, and the 2 layouts are then created for me, and the rest is actually the same as what we had before. I can go back to my automatically calculated layout. I could add marks. Those marks can actually be added automatically to the sheet as you go through this process. I have not set that up in this demo environment, but I could do that. So I could add marks. I could then again generate the JDF. With the imposed information, I can generate the PDFs, JDFs, die lines, and so on. So the rest of the demo is actually quite similar. The main point here is that in this case I had a collection of bound and unbound components in the same product, and IMP has ganged those together on one sheet without any problem. So that really doesn't matter to IMP. If you want to do that, it's definitely a possibility. So, okay. Let me go back to my presentation, or we're going to be much longer than I anticipated. So that means we've seen how to create jobs from XML and CSV, but of course that still doesn't mean that we're doing something in an automatic way. We are actually only creating the products a little easier than doing all of that manually. What about if I wanted to do everything manually? Well, in that case, I don't use IMP, but I use ImpFlow. ImpFlow is a separate application, and it does fully automated processing of all of the imposition tasks using hot folders. I can either use flows that I define in ImpFlow itself, and in that case, they're very easy to edit and they provide fully automated processing, or I can create a flow where everything is driven from XML. And I'll show you how that works in ImpFlow. I'm not going to look at examples of that XML, but we will be more than happy to discuss that offline. But let's start with the simple stuff again and show you how that works. So go back to IMP. I'm actually going to quit the manual version of IMP, and I'm going to launch ImpFlow. And in ImpFlow, you can see that I have a number of flows that are created, hot folder setups that are created, and each of those can be edited. So for example, if I open this one to look what is inside, edit flow, that gives me an overview of the different steps in that flow. And here the product is started from a PDF. It is using the file name of the PDF, and I'm not going to go in detail during this webinar, but again, more than happy to do so offline. In this case, it will use the file name of the PDF to provide information on the properties of the PDF. For example, the paper that should be used and so on. There is a file naming convention that you can use to communicate that information to IMP. And that means that if you drop a file with the correct file name in that ImpFlow hot folder, then ImpFlow will do the impositioning with the devices selected here. using all of the properties communicated through the file name convention. After that, it will export the imposition PDF, save a plan report, and then save the product itself. So a number of nicely defined visual steps that all of them can be configured very easily, and then once the flow is started, will provide fully automatic processing. Now, I'm going to look in a little bit more detail at this flow, and we'll see how that works when we do that. And what this flow does is use an XML file to start the actual flow. So very similar to what we did in the demo in the manual version of IMP, but instead of opening or starting a new product from XML in the manual version of IMP, I am setting up a hot folder where I can drop such an XML file, and then the rest of the processing will happen automatically. And what will happen? Well, all of the components from that XML will be added to a plan. The name of that plan will be AutoPlan in this case. I can give that whatever name you want. I can choose, just as I did on the manual side, I can choose whether I want the bound or unbound components or all of the components. You can also group components in that XML file. It's quite easy to set that up, and then I could add components belonging to specific groups as well. I then have an autoplan action, and the autoplan action defines how that planning is going to be done. It also defines what all of the different properties are. And then I'm going to export information. What I'm exporting here is the imposed PDF file, the imposed JDF file, an XML file containing all of the information about the plan. So if you wanted to have an XML to pick up and convey information back into the MIS or ERP system, for example, then this is certainly a way to do that. I'm going to save the, this is a report. So this is a PDF report with the overview and all of the information. This is the XML I was thinking of. So that's the one that you could use to do the integration with the MIS system. And then I'm going to save the product itself, and we'll see what that is in a second as well. But that's also quite interesting. So let me just close this again and launch that particular workflow. And I am going to go look at the hot folders. I have a hot folder for this flow. As you can see, I have an input folder here that is empty and an output folder that is empty at the moment. And all of the steps in my flow have been defined to put their output in the output folder. I can also specify other folders. Again, when you're doing integration with an MIS system, it can be useful to change the location where those files are, the result files are stored. You have full control over that, but in this case, I simply want everything in output. I'm going to copy that XML file, so the same XML we used for the manual demo, and I'm going to paste that in here. And then on the IMP flow side, what you'll see is that it shows you what steps it is going through, and at the end, it tells you that everything was done. In the input folder, I end up with a done folder. The file can also be simply removed, but in this case, I end up with a done folder and the XML is in there. And then on the output side, I have all of the files that I asked for. The JDF, the PDF file that was imposed, the XML file for the plan. So this is the XML file that contains all of the information about the planning process that IMP went through. That means that it defines the different layouts that were created. And for each layout, it defines where each of these components is. These transformation matrices give you a position for that component, tell you whether the component has potentially been scaled, tells you whether the component has been rotated. So all of those things that happen as a result of the properties that you've set up during the calculation process. So all of that information is in that XML, and that means that that could be fed back into another system from there. I also have the report PDF. In that report PDF, I can see all of the parameters of the ganging that happened. So I have all of the cost details here, including sheet coverage. And then for all of the layouts that were created, I have the details for that particular layout with the jobs on there, with actual sheet coverage information for the specific layout. So all of that information in a PDF format that I could refer to. And the last component is the one I skipped earlier, is that PDT file. And that PDT file, you can already see the imp logo here at the beginning of the file name. Well, if I quit the automated environment and I go back to the manual version of imp, then I could very easily, that's not the right folder, the folder is here, so let's just open that up. That opens up in imp, and that gives me all of the same component information and the plan information that was calculated by imp flow. So in this case, let me just open that. You saw that the name was auto plan. Well, what I get here is the exact same information, the exact same result as what we ended up with on the manual side of things. So this file that is created by imp, this PDT file that is created by imp flow, rather, by the automated version, is a file that I can very easily open up in the manual version of imp to check whether everything was done correctly. So this allows me to set up a fully automated hot folder with an input and an output folder, where in the output, as part of the planning process, a product file is created that can be opened by someone in imp, the manual version of imp. And because it contains all of the information, you can examine whether everything is correct. Or I could still go in now and look at the plan and perhaps swap the location of components and so on. So you still have that manual control at the end of the workflow. And that allows you to do a combination of fully automated ganging, where the majority of the process is handled automatically by imp flow, but where someone with imp manually will check the result of that imposition process and make sure that the files are actually all good before they are sent into the rest of the workflow. And if something needs to be changed, you don't have to restart the whole process. You just open it up in imp manual and then do the changes that you want and export the imposed PDF or JDF from there. Okay, now there is one last point. I should not forget that. I still have some time. There is one last point that I have not talked about and that I did promise to touch upon at least. And let me go back to imp flow. This workflow that I showed you is still, so this nice workflow here, this is still a workflow where the logic of what happens, the actual actions that imp takes, are determined by the flow definition. So from that XML file in the beginning, I have the components that are created in my plan, and then that is planned, but the actual steps and what results I want and where those results are, for example, this one is generated in a specific folder, the other one is generated in the output folder of the hot folder process. So all of those actions are still determined by imp flow itself through this setup. But there is actually another way to do this, and that is shown in the first imp flow I have created here. And if I open that one up, you'll see that it's actually a very, very simple setup that I have here. I've given that a name, and I have an input folder and an output folder, but the rest is handled directly through XML. So the XML that you expect in this particular input folder will not only contain the definition of the components that you want to impose, but it also will contain an embedded flow. And what I'm telling imp flow here is to run any of the embedded flow information in the XML. So think of it as an XML file that defines the products on the one hand, but then also defines the actions that should take place on the products with all of the properties for each of those actions. So all of the different settings that you have. And ImpFlow will look for XML files in the input folder and then execute all of the different actions that are in that XML file. I'm not going to show this right now because it would be exactly the same as what you've seen before. We have a full definition of that XML format if you are interested. This is typically what you would use if you build the solution into an MIS system. So if you integrate this with an MIS system, the MIS could at any given time export an XML with a number of job definitions. It can reference the files where they live in the file system for the MIS system. And then when everything is defined in the XML, so when all the files are defined in the XML, the MIS system can also write actions to be taken on those files in that same XML file, and ImpFlow simply executes what it finds in that XML file. Now, the XML that we're talking about is an extension of what I already showed in the example folder. So if I go back to my example XML, that will be an extension of that XML format. If you use the latest version of IMP, you can actually even simply use the metrics XML format as well. That is fully supported by ImpFlow as well. So if you already have an integration or you have a customer that has done an integration with metrics at some point and they rely on the metrics XML to define products and the rest of the actions to be taken, then you can simply use that metrics XML, drop that in an input folder, and that will be handled as well. Okay, so that is more or less what I wanted to cover. So if you have any questions, now would be a good time to enter those in the GoToWebinar control panel. Meanwhile, just as a little summary in here, what have we talked about? Well, all of what we talked about was rectangular products today. Like I said, there is an additional webinar 2 weeks from now that talks about packaging and label products. If you would rather talk about that earlier, then just send me a short email and I will be happy to set up a GoToMeeting session with you. We talked about ganging of both of those types of products. So the fact that IMP is capable of calculating solutions for bound and unbound components together, a book together with a leaflet or a bound brochure together with a bunch of business cards. All of those types of situations are possible. And we talked about how products are defined and how you can go through this whole process. And we basically started with a very manual process to show that products can be defined manually, but we very quickly went to a situation where you use a CSV file to define components and then do the ganging, to a situation where you have an XML file that defines the components that have to be ganged. And then as the last step, we looked at how you can, using ImpFlow instead of IMP, how you can set up hot folders, and in those hot folders either define in the hot folder setup the actions that need to be taken, or how you can create an XML file that defines both the product and the actions to be taken. Okay, let me look at questions. So can the cost and material data that is usually defined in an MIS system, can that be integrated in a way with IMP? Yes, as I think I've shown during the part on configuration, I think your question came before that, Jan. As I've shown in the part about the configuration, what you can do is import a CSV file into Imp. So you could set this up in such a way that there is an export done from the MIS system automatically, and that information is automatically fed into Imp so that the material data is up to date with the information that you already have in the MIS system. So that can certainly be set up. Can jobs be grouped? Yes, they definitely can. This is an area where perhaps it would be better to look at that in a little bit more detail, Paul. What we can do, if you're interested, is set up a short go-to-meeting to talk a little bit more about what that grouping process is and what types of things you can then do with those grouped jobs afterwards. Okay, another question, and this is a good one, Chris, and I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. I also got that question from someone else in the meantime, and I haven't gotten an answer back. So your question was, one of our presses requires a gutter area in the middle of B1 sheets. Is it possible to set that up? I'm tentatively going to say that yes, that should be supported, but let me get back to you on that to make sure that you get the right information on that. And if you want, I can show you how that could be done afterwards as well. So I made a note of that, and I'll get back to you with that. Restrictions about how many users can use Imp at the same time. Well, that obviously depends on the license that you have. If you have multiple users, you will have to have multiple licenses of Imp to run the software. However, there are provisions for that. Imp is also modular in pricing structure. I didn't talk too much about the commercial side here, but I can definitely get you some information about that, William. There are options so that, for example, if you have someone working in the planning department, that you don't need to pay for them to be able to export imposed PDF files, for example, if that is not part of their job. So that is something that we can definitely get you more information. Jim, you have an odd use case. Yes, that is an odd use case, and I don't know the answer. I suggest I get back to you on that one offline, because it looks like a very specific question for that. And some questions from Paul. Screenshots, I will get back to you on that one. And you have a specific question on textile, and I'm going to have to get back to you on that one as well. Okay, so if I have another question here about demo files and so on. If you want to take a look at Imp in more detail, there is a demo version that you can download. However, what is important is that the configuration that you work with is correct. So there's a couple of different ways we typically do that. Either you download Imp and you set up the configuration area so that you can try this with some of your files. We can help you in doing that. Or you can simply provide us some information about the devices that you would like to test with and some of the jobs that you would like to test with. For example, some of the input jobs and some imposed material, and we can prepare configuration for you. There is a way to import and export configuration data, so if we prepare it on our side, we can simply export that data and then send it to you. You import it into a demo version, and that should get you going much faster than before. You have my email address on there. You can also simply send a mail to info@4ps or support@4ps.com, and we'll make sure that those end up with the right person for that. So don't hesitate to ask about that. For specific questions like that, we'll be more than happy to do a one-on-one session and or help you to get a demonstration version so that you can test out what this would do in your workflow. And apart from the specific use case questions that I see in here, I think I've answered all of the generic questions. For those people that have a question I have not answered publicly here, I'll make sure to get back to you with answers on all of those. Meanwhile, if you have additional files that would show exactly what you're looking for or additional information on the devices that you want to support, just drop me a short email with that information and I will pick that up from there. Good, I think that was it. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. As I said a couple times, there is another one for IMP. There will be a follow-up webinar for IMP focusing on some of the same things, but with files that are defined with die-cut information. Also, a mix of rectangular job and die-cut jobs. IMP can also handle that. Thank you very much. I hope to see you again in a next webinar, as always. And then the only thing that I need to do is wish you a very nice rest of the day. Thanks.